I came home from 2 weeks overseas to find my front door lock had been changed and a stranger's dog was peeing on my hydrangeas. My mother had moved my brother into my house while I was gone, and when I called her, she laughed and said I should be grateful. Someone was watching the place. She thought blood was thicker than a deadbolt. She was wrong. I had a locksmith, a lawyer, and a police report filed before sundown, and that was just the beginning. Let me take you back to the moment everything unraveled. I'm a nurse practitioner. I work at a trauma center in Richmond, Virginia, and every February, I volunteer for a 2-week medical mission in Guatemala. It's the one thing I do for myself that isn't about saving money, climbing the ladder, or proving to anyone that I'm worth something. It's exhausting, beautiful work, and for 14 days, I don't check my personal email, I barely touch my phone, and I trust that the life I built back home will be exactly where I left it. That trust cost me everything. I had saved for 6 years to buy my house. 6 years of double shifts, of eating rice and beans 4 nights a week, of driving a car with no air conditioning through Virginia summers, because the $400 repair quote was $400 I could put toward a down payment. I closed on a 3-bedroom cottage in the Fan District 11 months ago. It wasn't big, but it was mine. Every square foot of it had my fingerprints on it, literally. I had refinished the hardwood floors myself, watching YouTube tutorials at midnight and sanding until my arms screamed. I painted every wall. I installed the kitchen backsplash tile by tile, cutting each piece with a wet saw I rented from Home Depot. That house was not just shelter. It was the physical proof that I, Sloane Mitchell, did not need anyone to build a life. When my cab pulled up from the airport on a Sunday evening, the first thing I noticed was the truck. A dented black pickup was parked in my driveway, oil stain bleeding onto the concrete I had pressure washed 2 weeks ago. I didn't recognize it. My next-door neighbor, Mrs. Palermo, was standing on her porch watering her ferns, and she gave me a look I couldn't quite read. Something between pity and warning. I dragged my suitcase up the front steps and put my key in the lock. It didn't fit. I tried again, thinking jet lag was making me clumsy. But no, the key slid in halfway and stopped dead. Someone had changed the lock. I stood there, blinking at my own front door like a stranger. Then I heard it. Music. Muffled through the walls. My walls. And a dog barking, a big one. From the sound of it, I didn't own a dog. I rang my own doorbell. The door opened, and a woman I had never seen before stood in my foyer wearing sweatpants and holding a bowl of cereal. She was maybe 23, bleached hair pulled into a messy bun, a tattoo of a butterfly on her collarbone. She looked at me like I was soliciting for a church. "Can I help you?" she said. Behind her, I could see my living room, except it wasn't my living room anymore. My linen sofa was shoved against the wall, covered with a stained blanket. A massive dog crate sat where my reading chair used to be. There were dishes on my coffee table, boots by the door, and a flat-screen TV I'd never seen mounted crookedly on the wall, covering the spot where I'd hung a print I bought in Antigua. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice sounding strange and detached, like it was coming from somewhere above me. "I'm Kayla," she said slowly, narrowing her eyes. "Tyler's girlfriend?" He said his sister was cool with this. Tyler. My brother. My 35-year-old brother, who hadn't held a job longer than 4 months in the last decade. The brother who borrowed $3,000 from me 2 Christmases ago to fix his transmission and spent it on a poker trip to Atlantic City. The brother who was currently, as far as I knew, living in a studio apartment on the south side that my parents were subsidizing. "Where is Tyler?" I asked. "He's at your parents' place," she said, spooning cereal into her mouth without a trace of concern. "He said he'd be back tonight." "You want to come in? It's your house, right?" "He said you'd be gone for like a month." I didn't go in. I stepped off my own porch, sat down on the bottom step, and called my mother. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been expecting this call. That detail would haunt me later. "Sloane, honey, how was Guatemala?" Her voice was bright, performative, the voice she used at church when the pastor asked about the family. "Mom, why is there a woman in my house?" "Oh, you're home already? I thought you weren't back until next week." She was stalling. I could hear it. "Mom, answer me," she sighed, The theatrical sigh she deployed when she wanted you to feel like you were being unreasonable before you'd even made your point. Okay, don't overreact. Tyler got into a little situation with his landlord. They had a disagreement about the lease, and he needed somewhere to stay. Your father and I don't have the room, you know that, and your house was just sitting there empty, so we gave him the spare key and told him to stay until you got back. It's not a big deal. You should be glad someone was watching the place. You changed my locks, I said. Tyler did that. He said the neighborhood made Kayla nervous. He was just being protective. You should thank him. The calmness I felt in that moment was terrifying. It wasn't peace. It was the flat line before a defibrillator fires. Mom, I said, I'm going to ask you one question, and I need the truth. Did Tyler ask me for permission? Well, we didn't want to bother you. You were doing your charity thing, and there was no cell service probably, and your father and I made the decision as a family. Tyler is your brother. Family doesn't need permission to help each other. I am going to call the police, I said, and I need you to hear me say this clearly so there's no confusion later. Tyler is trespassing in my house. He changed my locks. He moved a stranger and a dog into my property without my knowledge or consent. If he is not out by the time the officers arrive, he will be arrested. The performance evaporated. Her voice dropped an octave into something cold and venomous. Don't you dare. Don't you dare humiliate this family. Your brother is going through a hard time, and you're sitting on 3 empty bedrooms, like a dragon on a pile of gold. You have no husband, no children. What do you need all that space for? Hoarding rooms while your own flesh and blood sleeps in his car? He wasn't sleeping in his car, I said. He was in an apartment you and Dad were paying for. What happened? He got evicted, she snapped. The landlord was unreasonable. It doesn't matter. What matters is you're being selfish and cold, and I raised you better than this. I hung up and dialed 911. I didn't hesitate. The comment section of my life was not going to read, she should have called the cops immediately. I was calling them now. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. Officer Chen was the lead, a woman about my age with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She asked me 3 questions. Was my name on the deed? Yes. Had I given anyone permission to occupy the property? No. Did I want to press charges? Yes. What happened next was efficient and impersonal. Chen knocked on the door. Kayla answered, looking confused. Chen explained the situation. Kayla called Tyler. I could hear his voice through the phone, loud and indignant. Chen told him he had 2 hours to vacate, or she would return with a warrant for unlawful entry and trespassing. While we waited, I walked through my house with Chen. My stomach turned with every step. The guest bedroom had been turned into their room. My sheets, the 600 thread, Count Egyptian cotton set I'd treated myself to, were on the bed, stained with something I didn't want to identify. The second bedroom, my home office, had been converted into a storage room for Tyler's boxes. My desk was shoved into the closet. My filing cabinet was open and riffled through. In the kitchen, my pantry was bare. They had eaten through 2 weeks of groceries I'd meal prepped and frozen before leaving. But the worst was the backyard. I had spent 3 weekends building a raised garden bed. Tomatoes, herbs, peppers, all painstakingly started from seed. Tyler had moved the dog crate outside at some point, and the dog had torn through the garden. The plants were destroyed, the soil scattered across the patio. I photographed everything. Every stain, every scratch, every piece of damage. Officer Chen watched me without comment. Tyler showed up 40 minutes later, which meant he'd been at my parents' house 6 miles away, not at some distant location. He rolled up in the black truck, slammed the door, and marched across the lawn toward me like a man who had been personally wronged. He was 35, but looked 45. Thinning hair, beer gut straining against a faded graphic tee, the permanent squint of someone who spent too much time staring at screens and not enough time in the sun. He pointed a finger at me. You called the cops on me? On your own brother? Over a house you barely even live in? I live in it every day that I'm not overseas saving lives, I said, crossing my arms. You don't get to redecorate it because Mom said so. Dad told me to come here, he snarled. You want to take it up with him? Take it up with him. But I'm not leaving. Kayla is pregnant, and she is not going back to her mother's trailer in Mechanicsville. Something in my chest flickered. Kayla was pregnant. I looked past Tyler and saw her standing in the doorway, arms crossed over her stomach, face tight with anxiety. She looked exhausted. "I'm sorry about your situation," I said to her directly, my voice softening. "But this is my home, and no one asked me. Tyler is going to have to find somewhere else." "Where?" Tyler screamed. "Where am I supposed to go? You have 3 bedrooms. 3. And it's just you. Alone. Like always." Officer Chen stepped forward. "Sir, lower your voice, or I will place you in handcuffs right now. You have been informed this is not your property. You need to collect your belongings and leave." Tyler's jaw clenched. For a moment, I thought he might do something stupid, but he was a coward at his core, the kind of man who screamed at women but went silent around anyone with authority. He turned and stormed inside. It took him 90 minutes to load the truck. During that time, my phone rang 11 times. Mom, Dad, Aunt Pam, numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail. I was too busy walking through my house with a notepad, cataloging damage. When Tyler finally pulled out of the driveway, he rolled down his window. "Congratulations," he said. "You just killed this family." "This family was on life support long before tonight," I said. He peeled out, leaving tire marks on my street. Mrs. Palermo was still on her porch. She raised her watering can at me in what I chose to interpret as solidarity. That night, I couldn't sleep in my own bed. The sheets were ruined, and even after I stripped the mattress, the room smelled wrong, foreign, invaded. I slept on the couch with my new deadbolt locked and my phone face down on the coffee table. But before I slept, I did what I do best. I researched. I'm a nurse practitioner. My job is to look at symptoms and find the disease underneath. Tyler's eviction wasn't a symptom of a bad landlord. It was a symptom of something deeper, and I needed to know what it was before the next wave hit. I started with public records. Virginia's court system has an online portal, and I knew Tyler's full name and date of birth. The results loaded in seconds, and they loaded heavy. Tyler had not been evicted for a disagreement with the landlord. He had been evicted for non-payment of rent, 4 months of it. The landlord had filed in small claims court and won a judgment of $6,200. Tyler hadn't paid a cent of it, but that was just the surface. Beneath the eviction was a constellation of debt. 2 credit card companies had filed judgments against him. Combined total, $31,000. There was a personal loan default from an online lender for $8,000. And then the one that made my blood run cold, a garnishment order. Someone was already legally taking money from whatever income he earned. I cross-referenced the plaintiff on the garnishment. It was a company called Tidewater Capital Partners. A quick search revealed they were a collections firm that specialized in acquiring gambling debts from casinos. Tyler didn't have a landlord problem. He had a gambling addiction that had consumed every dollar he'd ever touched, and my parents had been patching the holes in his sinking ship for years while telling me he was finding himself. I kept digging. I found something that stopped me cold. A property lien search on my parents' address showed they had taken out a home equity line of credit 18 months ago. The amount, $40,000. Their house, the house my father had owned outright since 2009, now had a lien against it. They had mortgaged their home for Tyler. The retirement nest egg my father bragged about at every Thanksgiving was gone. They were drowning, and they had been too proud and too committed to the myth of Tyler's potential to tell anyone. And now they had moved him into my house because they had nothing left to give him except me. I printed everything. Then I went to sleep. The ambush came 3 days later, disguised as a family dinner at my parents' house. Aunt Pam called to personally guilt me into attending. "Your mother hasn't eaten in 2 days," she said. "Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. The least you can do is show up and listen." I showed up. But I didn't come to listen. I came with a manila envelope and the same steady hands I used to start IVs on screaming patients at 3 in the morning. The house was full. Mom and Dad in their usual spots. Dad in the recliner looking diminished. Mom perched on the edge of the love seat with tissue in hand. Aunt Pam and Uncle Ron were there as backup. Tyler was on the couch, arms crossed, jaw set. Kayla sat next to him, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else on earth. "You're here," Mom said, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. "Good. We need to talk about what you've done." "What I've done," I repeated. "You humiliated your brother in front of the police," Dad said. His voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual bluster. "In front of the neighbors. You changed the locks on him like he was a criminal." "He changed my locks first," I said. "That's different," Mom snapped. "He was protecting the property." "My property," I said. Uncle Ron cleared his throat. "Sloane, nobody's saying what they did was right. But Tyler's in a bad spot. The baby's coming. Can't you just let him stay in the spare rooms until he gets back on his feet? It could be a few months. Family helps family." I looked at Uncle Ron. He was a good man, a mechanic who ran his own shop and had lent my father money more times than he probably remembered. He didn't know what he was defending. "Uncle Ron," I said calmly. "How much has Dad borrowed from you in the last 2 years?" Ron blinked. "That's between your father and me?" "Is it?" I asked. "Because I think it's relevant to this conversation." I opened the manila envelope. I pulled out the first document and laid it on the coffee table. Tyler leaned forward. "What is that?" "That is the home equity line of credit Dad and Mom took out 18 months ago against this house. $40,000. I looked at my father. "Where did that money go, Dad?" The room went silent. My father's face drained of color. "That is none of your business," he whispered. "It became my business when you broke into my home and installed your son in it like he was a tenant," I said. I pulled out the second document. "This is Tyler's court record. Not the story you told me. Not the bad landlord fairy tale. He was evicted for not paying rent for 4 months. He owes $6,200 to his former landlord. He owes $31,000 in credit card debt. He owes $8,000 on a defaulted personal loan. And he owes an amount I couldn't determine to a collections firm that buys gambling debts from casinos." Kayla stood up. "What?" Tyler grabbed her arm. "Sit down. She's lying." Kayla pulled her arm free and picked up the papers. Her hands were shaking. "You told me the credit cards were paid off. You told me we were starting fresh. Baby, listen." Tyler started. "Don't," Kayla said, her voice cracking. "Just don't." I turned to my parents. "You mortgaged your house for this. You emptied your savings. And when you ran out of money, you looked at the one person in this family who had anything left, and you decided to take it. You didn't ask me. You didn't warn me. You waited until I was in another country, and you moved him in like I was dead and the house was up for grabs. We were going to tell you," Mom said weakly. "When?" "After he destroyed the place. After the dog tore up the rest of my floors. After Kayla had the baby in my living room, and suddenly it was too cruel to ask a new mother to leave. I know exactly how this was going to play out. You were going to create a situation so entrenched that removing him would make me look like a monster." My father stood up. His hands were trembling, but not from illness, from rage. "Everything I have done," he said through gritted teeth, "has been for this family. I kept a roof over your heads. I put food on the table. And now, when your brother needs help, you stand there with your papers and your accusations, like some kind of prosecutor. You are my daughter. You owe this family." "I owe this family?" I said. "I owe this family?" "Dad, I paid my own way through nursing school. I worked nights at a gas station to make rent, while Tyler was getting his second DUI expunged with money you borrowed from Uncle Ron. I have never asked you for a single dollar. Not one. And you repaid that independence by breaking into my home." I turned to Uncle Ron. He was reading the bank statements, his face hardening with every line. "Ron," I said, "the $4,000 Dad borrowed from you last March for roof repairs. There were no roof repairs. He gave it to Tyler to cover a gambling debt. The same way the $8,000 from the year before went to Tyler's lawyer. The same way every dollar you've ever lent this family has gone straight into a hole that Tyler dug and Dad keeps filling." Uncle Ron set the papers down and looked at my father. "Gary, tell me she's wrong." My father couldn't look at him. "That's what I thought," Ron said quietly. He stood up, put on his jacket, and walked to the door. He paused and looked back at my mother. "Donna, you should be ashamed. The door closed behind him. The room felt smaller. Kayla was crying silently, still reading the court documents. She looked up at Tyler with an expression I recognized from work, the face of someone who has just received a devastating diagnosis. "How much do you owe?" she whispered. Tyler said nothing. He was staring at the floor, his jaw working, fists clenched against his thighs. "How much, Tyler?" "I don't know," he muttered. "A lot." Kayla wiped her face. She turned to me. "Can you take me somewhere?" "I need to go to my cousin's house in Fredericksburg. I can't be here." "Of course," I said. "You are not taking her anywhere," Mom screamed, standing up so fast her tissue box fell to the floor. "She is carrying my grandchild. She is staying right here." Kayla turned to my mother with a look that could have cut glass. "Your son lied to me about everything. His debts, his record, his plan. You helped him lie. You moved us into someone else's house and told me it was fine. I am not raising my child around people who think stealing from family is love." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard in that house. I drove Kayla to Fredericksburg that night. The drive was an hour and 20 minutes of near silence. She stared out the window, one hand on her stomach, processing the demolition of every plan she'd made. "Somewhere past Spotsylvania," she spoke. I knew something was off. He always had cash, but never had a paycheck. He'd disappear for hours and come back smelling like cigarettes and cheap cologne. I asked once, and he said he was at a buddy's watching the game. I wanted to believe him. "It's not your fault," I said. "He's good at it. They're all good at it. Your parents really mortgaged their house." "Yes, for gambling debts? For Tyler, which amounts to the same thing." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "Thank you for telling me the truth. Everyone else in that family would have let me walk into that fire blind." I dropped her off at her cousin's house at 11:30. The cousin, a sturdy woman named Brianna, met us on the porch with a blanket and a mug of something hot. She hugged Kayla and looked at me over her shoulder. "She's staying as long as she needs," Brianna said. "And your brother better not show up here." "He won't," I said. "He doesn't have gas money." The aftermath was slow and merciless, which is the way justice works when the damage is structural rather than explosive. I filed a formal police report for the break-in, the lock change, and the property damage. Officer Chen helped me document everything: the damaged floors, the destroyed garden, the rifled filing cabinet. Total estimated cost of repairs, $4,800. I filed in small claims court against Tyler. He didn't show up for the hearing. I won a default judgment. I also discovered, while going through the filing cabinet Tyler had rummaged through, that several documents were missing: my birth certificate, my social security card, and a folder containing old tax returns. A credit check revealed why. Someone had opened a store credit card in my name 3 months ago at an electronics retailer. The balance was $2,700. The shipping address was Tyler's old apartment. Identity theft. My own brother had stolen my identity. I filed a report with the FTC and disputed the charges. I also added this to the police file. Officer Chen called me personally when she saw the update. "This isn't just trespassing anymore," she said. "We're looking at breaking and entering, identity theft, and fraud. The detectives unit is going to want to talk to you." Tyler was arrested 2 weeks later at my parents' house, during what I assume was another meal my mother cooked him while pretending nothing had happened. The charges were unlawful entry, identity theft, and fraud. Bail was set at $15,000. My parents couldn't pay it. Their equity line was tapped out. He sat in Henrico County Jail for 6 weeks before accepting a plea deal. 2 years of probation, mandatory financial counseling, community service, and full restitution, though the restitution was symbolic at best. You can't squeeze money from a man who has none. My parents didn't speak to me for 3 months. Then my father had an actual health scare, a minor cardiac event that landed him in the ER. Aunt Pam called me, not to guilt me this time, but because she was genuinely frightened. I went to the hospital. I'm a medical professional. I don't let personal grievances interfere with patient care, even when the patient is the man who ransacked my life. My father was in a hospital gown, looking frail and reduced, nothing like the authoritarian who had roared at me across his living room. My mother was in the chair beside him, clutching his hand, her eyes red and hollow. When he saw me, he opened his mouth, and I braced for the attack. But what came out was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Sloane." 2 words. 29 years of silence and dysfunction, and he compressed it into 2 words from a hospital bed. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. I didn't forgive him that day. I didn't forgive him the day after, either. Forgiveness isn't a transaction. It's not a debt that gets settled with 2 words in a fluorescent-lit room. But I acknowledged it. I nodded. And I checked his chart, adjusted his pillow, and told the nurse to monitor his potassium levels because the reading looked off. I went home that night to my house. My repaired, rekeyed, reseeded house. The garden was coming back. New tomato starts were pushing through the soil in the raised bed I'd rebuilt. The floors had been resanded and resealed. The walls smelled like fresh paint. I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine and looked at the yard. It was quiet, not the silence of something missing, but the silence of something settled, something whole. My phone buzzed. A text from Kayla. She had sent a photo, a sonogram, a baby girl. Underneath she wrote, named her Grace, because someone showed me some when I needed it most. I stared at the photo for a long time. Then I typed back, "She's beautiful. If you ever need anything, I'm here, but only for you and Grace, not for him." I set the phone down and picked up my wine. The evening light caught the edge of my garden, turning the new green leaves golden. I had lost a brother. I had nearly lost my home. I had definitely lost the fantasy that my family would ever value me for anything other than what I could provide. But I had kept the house. I had kept my name clean. I had kept my sanity. And I had learned something that no one in the Mitchell family had ever been willing to teach me. The people who love you don't need to be reminded that your property is not their property. They don't need to be told that your success is not their safety net. And they certainly don't need to break into your home to feel at home in your life. I took a sip of wine and watched the last of the sunlight disappear behind the rooftops. It tasted like mine.